I just
now you got it.
There we go.
Okay. So now I can share my screen. Okay, great. Thank you for joining us for the Q1 update for Refashion Seed. I'll jump straight into things. We postponed it. This was supposed to happen on I think it was supposed to happen on the 28th of April, but we pushed it back because we were participating in a program then, and there was just so much work that we decided it would be better if we moved it back to now. So we've changed the order of the agenda a little bit. For most of you, our strategy is somewhat familiar. And so we've moved that to the end. It used to be that that's what we'd start with. So we'll jump straight into a portfolio update. We'll talk about the macro environment a little bit. That shouldn't be new because we've been tracking that almost every quarter, and many of the themes are still the same. We'll talk about the fundraising environment, then we'll do the strategy update and open the session for Q&A. So we've been busy. I think that is the theme for every quarter since we started. So made our first investment in July of 2021. As of the end of Q1, we had made 36 investments altogether, with 34 of those being a first-time check and 2 being reinvestments. In Q1, we made 6 new investments, and we'll talk about those later on. The key deals, as we call them, these are investments we made that went on to raise a subsequent round. So Green Screens is one of them. We've talked about that before. Stimulus, Simply Fiber, Autonomy, and ShipDay is in the midst of closing a round now. Most of the round is accounted for. We're reinvesting in ShipDay. And True to Form is raising a round as well, and they've made a lot of progress towards that round. And we'll be investing in the round for True to Form. Actually, we've already invested. We've reinvested in the follow-on round for True to Form, and we're in the process of making the reinvestment in ShipDay. The good news is that as difficult as the fundraising environment has been for almost everyone, the startups in our portfolio are encountering significant interest. And so, as I said to the founders in one email, fundraising is going to be difficult for everyone, but because of the nature of what they do for their customers, investors eventually get around to making an investment. In fact, just 30 minutes ago, we got an email from a startup which we had committed to. Lisa, when did we commit to Extra Sense? I think it was.
Oh, Lord. Yeah.
It was maybe in January.
Yeah.
February. Yeah. An investor that we introduced them to has committed to invest $300,000. So that's one of the instances in which our $25,000 investment has unlocked an additional $300,000 from an investor that we introduced the startup to. The distribution of startups in the portfolio is heavily weighted towards data and decision analytics. One might say, well, aren't you a data and decision analytics fund? The truth is that data and decision analytics tends to be the primary or the secondary category for almost all the other categories. So for example,
every business is a data business.
Yes. So all the nine startups in next gen logistics are also included in that 32 for data and decision analytics. All the 7 in advanced manufacturing the same. I think it might only be the 2 in advanced materials that we couldn't legitimately describe as data and decision analytics as well.
By the way, I'm sorry to, Brian.
Yeah, jump in.
The data analytics, I absolutely believe everybody's doing that. Decision analytics is a little trickier. I don't want to take up time now, but boy, I would love to see what they're doing in decision analytics.
Yeah, when we get to the Q&A, we can
Okay.
talk about it some more.
There's a bunch of AI companies I'd love to get your meaty hooks into, Warren.
And then in terms of the demography of the portfolio, we're pretty proud of the distribution. I've told Lisa we need to work harder to see more Black founders. I feel as if we aren't seeing enough of them. But overall, I'm happy with the diversity of the portfolio.
I think one of the things that I'd like to highlight here too is something that we discussed, Brian, that you know, Black and Latinx and female founders really need a sizable, like a real champion. And so I think it may also be hindering their reaching out to us because our check sizes aren't large.
Yeah.
So,
It's when you're raising a $2 million round, the 25K from REFASHIOND Ventures is nice, but it doesn't really solve the problem in a meaningful way. But I think, you know, that being said, the fact that we can introduce them to investors who will follow on with $300K or $500K or even $250,000 is helpful. And this is the portfolio. On this page, is there any significant news on this page? Autonomy, they raised the round. Stimulus has been doing a lot of work with Microsoft and Northwestern Mutual and
Green Screen seed to Series A.
Yeah, Green Screens raised a Series A. On this page, Simplify, I think, is in the process of raising a round.
Well, they're gearing up to raise. I know we have Phil here on the call. Woohoo! Hey, Phil.
That's right. Hey, Lisa. Yeah, we'll be opening up the round a bit later this year, but we're getting close and things are going great.
That's awesome. Ship Day, like I said, is closing its round. True to Form is raising. Who else? Arcstone has opened its customer center in Detroit and is now in the midst of really expanding its footprint in the United States. Let me see on this page. Guildform is having a lot of really interesting conversations. And given how little capital she's raised, the revenue potential of some of the conversations she's having is absolutely outstanding. Like a pipeline revenue potential that's maybe 10 or 20 times, maybe even 50 times the capital that she's raised so far if everything goes well. So that's exciting.
And some of the largest brands in the world.
Yeah. YZ won a global RFP for one of the largest chocolate companies in the world, beating out some really, really big competition. And so they are raising a round to enable them fulfill the RFP. They're starting with 4 countries in Europe. And if things go the way that we hope they will, that will expand to 23 other markets around the world.
And it's creating some FOMO from the competitors of this huge chocolate company.
Yep. And Eric is on the call. Eric just, he texted me yesterday to say that the prospective company has papered the agreement with NFI. Eric, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it was through an introduction through you fine folks, Lisa and Brian, and it's validating for us because our open source project has grown and been successful primarily in capital markets. And look, our hypothesis is that painting data on a screen is more than just a capital markets challenge. So the
Yeah.
NFI folks have been, one, amazing to work with thus far, but it's also helping prove out that, one, that our product is viable well outside of just capital markets, and two, the notion of large data sets and sharing it both internal and external with clients, suppliers, people transporting, is something that not just traders on the capital markets desk can that need help with. It's also helpful that technology as the enabler for them to be sticky with some of their carriers, and being able to share that data professionally and accurately is also something that we've learned throughout the way. And frankly, this feels like a very, very repeatable pattern for us, call it in logistics space, because they're using old tools and the challenges that NFI have. Fairly confident that other firms in this space, just moving stuff around the globe, is going to be a very similar challenge. So yeah, it was good.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. And let me see on this slide, what are the highlights? So these are the new kids. These are the new kids in the portfolio, the new startups in the portfolio. And we'll delve into them a little bit more. I think probably one to highlight here is Parsimony. They just got into the SAP IO supply chain program. And that means that out of 500 companies, they were one of the 10 that made it into the program. So we're quite excited about that. So a little bit more detail on the new companies in the portfolio. The very first investment we made in Q1 was in First Shift. And briefly, what First Shift does is enable autonomous supply chain planning across the supply chain ecosystems of their customers. And basically, this is happening because as disruptions keep taking place and shifting from one area to another, it becomes increasingly necessary that things that can be automated, and then things that people have to, and then things that people have to take care of, be taken care of by people. The team is highly experienced. Many of the supply chain solutions in the market currently were built with the involvement of people on First Shift's team. And so, one, it's a bet on the thesis that autonomous supply chain planning is going to become increasingly useful for companies, and companies will pay for good solutions that do that. And then the second bet is on the team and their experience.
Carnegie Mellon.
The next one is Clarium Health. And Clarium excited us because Steve somehow has done a really good job so far of cobbling together disparate IT systems in the hospital, in the healthcare industry, mostly in hospitals. And basically what Clarium does is enable end-to-end visibility and automation specifically for hospitals and their partners. And part of the issue that these organizations face is that their systems are old and archaic, and a lot of the time they are relying on relationships that aren't fit for purpose when there's a crisis. And this is some of what happened during the peak of the COVID
It
pandemic.
was the crux of the crisis for a lot of hospitals. So I'm particularly impressed how he basically took the crisis and turned it into an opportunity, because this industry needs this type of critical infrastructure to respond in a state of crisis. And there was no ability for any of these hospitals to switch vendors or to have alternate vendors queued up, or to even understand what their opportunities were for inventory and replenishment.
And it's not as if because the pandemic has been declared over, or whatever the technical term, the Center for Disease Control
Don't jinx it.
is. But the other thing that has happened, and this is especially the case in the United Kingdom, is that the pandemic put so much stress on healthcare workers that many of them left. And job satisfaction is really, really low. And so even though the pandemic is over, there's still a need for hospitals to start thinking about how to solve this problem. The one thing he's done that I found interesting is that he starts his conversations with the CFOs and the supply chain teams. And once they get it, then they ensure that it's propagated throughout the rest of the hospital. And I think that's a smart approach.
Yeah.
Parsimony is, I told you they got into the SAP program on supply chain. We've known the team since 2019. We've been following their work closely. They're building a platform to help hardware manufacturers connect and collaborate across the various tiers of their manufacturing supply chain. Oh, I left out a phrase. And it's taken them a while to get going because what they're building is not simple. It isn't easy to build. But the platform is ready, it works. In fact, now what they found is that their customers are asking them, we would rather process our payments on your platform as opposed to having some external partner of yours do the processing. And so they are in the midst of trying to build an embedded fintech option.
Vertical integration is a huge theme that we've been seeing, especially across such complex systems, and their tech, their baseline tech is so impressive and beautiful because it goes all the way back to the design and planning of any built machinery, parts, etc., and extrudes them out into 3D views so that you can break down to every component within a piece of machinery and identify materials and sourcing.
Yeah. And I was going to say something which now has slipped my mind.
Sorry, I derailed you.
Oh, the other exciting thing is that they are starting to, because of their getting into the SAP program, it means that they're going to start speaking with much larger companies. So for example, they're having early conversations with Volvo. That's one of the names I remember from the update that they sent this morning. And there's another company of similar size that they're talking to. So we feel as if this is an exciting time to be investing. Lisa, you want to talk about Mavi?
Oh my God, I do. So Mavi, I'll pitch it as I see it. The reason I fell in love with Mavi is it basically turns your car into kind of like Knight Rider. If you all remember that show way back in the day, Brian, you probably don't have a reference.
No.
It was an 80s TV show where your car talked to you and can come when you call it and does all these things. So it's not quite that, but this is turning your car into the ultimate concierge. So if your car, as you're driving about doing your daily routine, can identify that you're going to be within X amount of proximity to your dry cleaner, and it knows you had dry cleaning you dropped off and that the dry cleaning is done and ready for pickup, would you like me to ping the dry cleaner to have it ready for drive-by pickup? Because you're going to be on their block in 5 minutes. Yes, please. So all of these things about breaking up your local last mile and redistributing it, because now your car is actually facilitating the coordination of last mile logistics instead of the logistics players having to bring it to you. So even simple things like when you get into your car in the morning, would you like to place your Starbucks order? And having the car notify Starbucks so it's ready when you drive up to the drive-through. Game changing.
So if that problem makes you initially think, that's interesting, but is that really an important problem? What is now happening is that because Mavi has demonstrated that they can do the things that Lisa just described, now companies that have, armies of people traveling from customer to customer, helping those customers solve problems, are coming to Mavi and they're saying, wait, could you outfit our fleet with your solution so that when, our salespeople or our pharmaceutical reps are on the road, our truckers are out on the road, they don't have to spend time trying to figure out where they should stop for lunch, for example, or trying
where
to
there's a bathroom.
where there's a bathroom, or if they have a problem with their car, trying to figure out where the closest place that they could go to have the car fixed. Those sorts of problems are the sorts of things that Mavi is now speaking with potential customers about.
And they have at CES, they had probably, I think it was 5 of the top car companies ask them for pilots.
Yes.
So they're struggling to keep up with the demand right now.
Yeah.
Because every car company is trying to tackle this. And I know a lot of people are wondering, well, why wouldn't just Google do this or Waze? Their experience is so specific to understanding the interactions of the actual user. It's not in Google's wheelhouse. Google doesn't actually have buy-in from a lot of car companies. They want to kick Google out of their cars because then Google owns their customer. There's a ton of different reasons, but they're getting so many data feeds that eventually they can actually have a mom driving along in the car with the kid in the back seat screaming that they want chocolate goldfish or I won't stop crying. And she could shout out to her car dashboard, find me chocolate goldfish. It'll give her the 3 local closest options and she can choose which one she wants to purchase it at. They'll put the purchase through and it could be ready for drive-through pickup as she drives by and throws it in the back seat at her kid.
Yep, and thanks for mentioning that, because the other thing that's happening too is that retailers are getting to the point where they can't expand their offerings for customers to drive by and pick things up, because what happens is customers don't send the orders through till they're in the parking lot. Right, you drive into the parking lot, you stop, you pick out your phone, and then you place your order, and Target does not have enough time. Target does not have enough time to put it together because now you're scrambling their scheduling. And so Target is having conversations, companies like Target, not Target specifically. I can't remember if Target specifically is talking to Mavi, but some retailers are talking to Mavi and saying, wait, could we work with you to solve this problem of customers constantly messing up our scheduling because of the way that they interact with our drive?
It's ultimately fixing everything that's broken about buy online, pick up in store, which I don't know how many of you have done it. I have the world's worst experience with a Walmart buy online, pick up in store, and makes it all about the consumer.
Yeah. Lisa, you want to talk about Arvist?
Yeah, so Arvist is, I like to think of it as an AI data layer over the physical world. And it does this through existing video technologies. So any, I don't want to call it surveillance, but your video cameras throughout any facility where you have warehouses, any other types of infrastructure, there's usually video cameras. Those video cameras can be used to extract what is a object versus a human, and sensing without PII, so no personal identifiers on humans, what activities they're doing, how to streamline those activities, and how to recommend that they modify going about their daily activities to increase efficiency, reduce potential injury, and overall streamline operations. I personally am obsessed about this as an application for factories, because factories are constantly looking for ways to streamline their efficiencies. And instead of assessing the throughput capacity of individual workers by their ticketing, putting down their throughput or looking at their stack at the end of the day, things like this integrated with Jibe are going to give us such real-time data on efficiency of humans, which haven't output data in this way before.
Yeah.
Advocate, I'm going to talk about this one too. So we saw her speak at, or was it Morgan Stanley?
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
Morgan Stanley.
And I'm feeling the pain of contracts and deals and having to manage all of the mutual NDAs, individual NDAs, whatever contracts with tied to specific deals, and assessing what phrases are repetitive, which ones are unique to specific contracts. This platform is leveraging AI and is focusing specifically on the ingestion of contracts and management of contracts and all legal for supply chain. And I just had a session with her a couple of weeks ago where she was sharing with me the latest thinking and requests from all the customers she's been talking to. And I quickly did a little wireframing, and she was like, oh my God, I'm going to go and build exactly what you wireframed out, because it absolutely encapsulates everything our customers have been asking for. So I can't wait to circle back with her in a few weeks to see how she's translated it. It's going to change the game, because as you ingest all of your documents, they're in one place. You have a single source of truth, but it's not like Google Docs in that it's unsecured and has your data out in the cloud somewhere. It has security, it has encryption, it has the ability to look for documents by deal, by company, by individual, seeing all the affiliated docs, and then eventually using AI to assess standardized terms and to see where there's differences in contracts. So you don't have to read through everything line by line. The AI can highlight the areas that are different and save you time. I can't tell you how much time I've spent just trying to reconcile legal terms across documents. This thing is a godsend, and it's simple, it's inexpensive, and doesn't require teams and teams of people to set you up and integrate, unlike all of the other players in this space that are primarily focused on big law firms.
The one thing the only modification I'll make is that when we saw Pradnya pitch, she wasn't thinking about supply chain at all. It was when we said, hey, we'd like to talk to you because we saw you pitch and we think this is something that people in supply chains need, that she was like, wait, oh my God, yes, I didn't think about that. So that's the only modification I've made.
Yeah, and it's a vastly different user experience than all the other players, because they are focused on law firms and lawyers, as opposed to the business people that are managing their own contracts.
Yeah. So that's it in terms of the 6 new additions to the portfolio this quarter. The universe of co-investors with whom we are now affiliated is growing. Let me see, who did we add this time? Lisa, do you remember who's new on this slide?
Well, I don't know if we added them on this
if we
one,
put them on this slide.
Yeah. I know. Is it Menlo and oh, you put me on the spot, Brian.
No, that's fine. It's a vanity question anyway. So Before we talk about the rolling fund, anyone have questions? Any of the LPs have questions based on the new additions to the portfolio? No. Okay.
Brian, actually, Arun Sankaran here.
Hi, Arun.
Is it Steve at Clarion, the healthcare supply chain
Yes.
company?
Yes.
Or Clarion? I wouldn't mind meeting with him. I think I've come across some opportunities on the government for some COVID-19 related supply chain tracking stuff that his company might be worth plugging into.
Okay. Yeah. I will send a note soon after the call.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. So the rolling fund, we're now at roughly $2 million of committed capital. Like I said, 36 investments, 34 unique startups, and that includes the six startups we added to the portfolio last quarter. We are feeling the slowdown in fundraising. We're experiencing what everyone else is experiencing, which is that LPs aren't as eager to make new commitments. But that being said, I think we're in good shape. We've deployed about half the committed capital so far, just a little less than half. I think the 2 investments we are making this week will probably bring us right to about half the committed capital. So we have a significant amount going forward to put to work. If you're currently an LP, thank you for your support. We'd love to have you extend your subscription, and especially we're still taking new LPs into the rolling fund. And so if you know anyone that you think we should be speaking with, we'd love new introductions, and we can send you some information to share. In terms of the institutional fund, which is why we had to delay this update by about a month, we went through the Cool Water Build program. It lasted 8 weeks. It was a lot more work than I anticipated. But having completed that means we've done recasts. Lisa went through.
We've done all the programs.
Yeah, we've done all the programs. And so now we're actively talking to family offices, especially, and institutions if they express an interest in talking to us. We don't think this first fund is going to be one that institutions typically would invest in, but if there's a warm introduction.
Although that said, we have had some interest from some institutions that are downloading our data room, doing some diligence, and having multiple calls.
Yeah.
You never know.
And on that note, that's as much as we can say about
the
institutional fund. The latest earned media, I think this is the most noteworthy. So Revere VC, which is a new platform that is being built to connect emerging managers with limited partners. They spent some time with us talking to us about our thesis and turned that into a piece of content that they distributed to their LP network. And the macro environment, articles in the news continue to confirm the guesses we made as long ago as 2016 about why the supply chain investment thesis makes a lot of sense. And
guesses, informed insight.
Intelligent guesses, as one of my friends likes to say. So in this article specifically, and all these, the links are in the written update I sent in April, so you can find them there. But in this article specifically, the author highlights that because of changes in regulations, and because the new regulations are becoming more complex, and also because of what's happening in the geopolitically, supply chain visibility and transparency are becoming an issue. And the only way that companies can adapt and stay in compliance is with some sort of technology. This article makes the same point in a slightly different way. And Rana is the author of, I forget the title of her book now, but it's one of the 6 books we recommended in the 3rd quarter of 2022. But the argument she makes is that consumer tech might not be the area in which the most growth is happening, because the digitization of supply chains, basically, the digitization of legacy industries is really where the most activity is taking place. And then I can't remember the author's name. I had a conversation with him after reading this. But in this article, the author argues that most venture capital firms are not built for the environment we're going into, because it's an environment in which, like Rana said in the article just before this one, growth is going to happen in legacy industries being digitized. They require more capital, they require expertise, and they require patience and a way of operating that the industry is generally unaccustomed to. And if I remember clearly, I think he gave a couple of examples of firms that he thinks are well positioned for the environment we're going into. Unfortunately, he hadn't heard about REFASHIONed before he wrote the article.
We
so
would have been
not,
in the headline.
So we're not mentioned in it. And then this also took me by surprise, because this essentially makes the argument that the climate crisis, our economic systems, and the environment and sustainability are all intricately linked. And David Craig is the co-chair of a task force that's made up of some really large global companies. And they basically delve into what these companies are doing to try to fix these problems.
Debt ceiling.
Yes.
I added this slide in here because I work with a lot of factories on the regular through REFASHIONed OS, and they are all hair on fire about the debt ceiling, because a lot of our factories that have managed to stay afloat are working primarily on military contracts, DoD, that sort of thing, and their money is dried up. They said they can't even place orders for raw materials for subsequent production because they're tied to the military. And if this doesn't pass, their entire manufacturing infrastructure in this country could be killed by its own government.
Yeah.
And that leads to this, US manufacturing. It's kind of an important area that most people don't think of as technology or as so foundational to our economy. Manufacturing contributes 2.77 trillion to the US economy annually. And it's been proven to be one of the largest economic multipliers. Whenever there's a recession, people that actually can manufacture and produce things are always the ones that do well. I think there's going to be a big clawback of, hopefully, if we can get this debt ceiling passed, to made in the USA. And on the next slide, well, there already is a big clawback, but an ever growing one. Tied to that is the frothy environment and discussion about de-dollarization. And this is really, is the dollar still going to remain a strong currency globally? given the economic and political climate that's going on everywhere around the world. If the dollar drops in value, we could potentially shore up manufacturing and be poised for great exports. But all of this impacts investments because everything is in play. There's nothing that is set it and forget it about your supply chain, your business, your investments. It's all in play.
Yeah. And then, of course, China. Like I said, these are all themes that we've been covering for at least the past 15 months or so. So China continues to be in the news. Now, the specific concerns about the interdependence of the United States and China from a supply chain perspective. And so in this first article on CNBC, a Biden advisor is talking about how far behind the United States is when it comes to gaining some independence from supply chains in China. And then in the article from the Atlantic Council, they spend some time talking about the semiconductor standoff. But that really is also, that's also another one that should be familiar, because we highlighted Chip Wars, which is one of the 6 books we recommended in the third quarter of 2020.
Love that book. By the way, I never read books. I read that book cover to cover. Cover to cover.
It's an amazing book, isn't it?
It was, I call it the book about the problem.
Yeah.
So supply chains is the problem.
Yes, supply chains, that's
the
the problem.
book about the problem. It is just an amazing book.
Yeah. Thank you. And then, to my complete surprise, or maybe not so much, given some of the other news items we focused on last year, but in the annual threat assessment, there was explicit reference to how China is weaponizing its supply chain dominance. And that makes me think that at the highest levels of government, there are conversations about how this is a weakness that the United States has to pay attention to. And so what that means from our perspective is we expect that there will be significant investments. And of course, there already are, right? The CHIPS Act is one example. But we think there will be more waves of investments of that magnitude and along those lines to shore up the United States' ability to protect its supply chains.
Just to underscore the interconnectedness of all of these macro environmental issues, the CHIPS Act is a great thing. They've been reshoring and laying down new developments for building new factories here in the US. All of that is in a precarious position right now because of the debt ceiling and having the budget not passing. Every day that they're sitting on a lot that has equipment not in use and leases that they're paying for and not producing, it potentially is going to be, they won't be able to recover from it if it lingers too long.
And that's it in terms of the macro environment. The thing that I take away from all the news is, summarized in this image, which is really that the entire world's GDP is dependent on supply chains, and as the years go by, the amount of capital that has to be invested to shore up those supply chains, to refashion them so that they can meet the challenges of the future is absolutely astronomical.
One thing we didn't touch upon, Brian, actually, is the recent pushing up of the deadline. We are going to surpass the 1.5 degrees Celsius within the next 5 years.
Yeah, I think
it's now a 66% chance.
Yeah,
us
yeah,
of that
I
happening.
think what was the date? I think the article in the Guardian yesterday said 2027
Mhm.
is when we'll probably exceed that that mark. And the Lisa, we forgot to add the updated thesis, but we've updated the thesis to make it more straightforward and easier for everyone to understand. We've thrown away all the jargon, ecosystems and networks and all that. And now it's simply REFASHIOND Ventures invests in the refashioning of supply chains across data and AI, advanced materials, advanced manufacturing, and next generation logistics. And as you know, we started with a community in 2017. And then in 2019, at the behest of a large fashion and apparel brand, we started building this operating company, REFASHIOND OS. And then the fund came online in 2021. And so all three work hand in hand, forming a virtuous cycle. And
it's interesting. One of the #1 things that we heard during all of the many programs we've been through is that LPs want to see that you actually roll up your sleeves and help your portfolio companies. Yes. And so it's taken a bit of time, but people are starting to realize, oh, that's what ROS does. Instead of seeing it as, well, what's Lisa really spending her time on? She's actually rolling up her sleeves and helping the portfolio companies. It just has a separate entity. So everything truly is all supply chain and creates a virtuous cycle. Yeah.
And that's it. Questions, comments?
So I have something to offer. It's not a question or comment. I was invited just a couple of weeks ago. Columbia Business School is running a program they call EC America. So the EC is entrepreneurship and competitiveness. Apparently it's aimed at Hispanic entrepreneurs. And they've reached out to various academics, me being one, to help out. So I've been assigned a company, which happens to be based in Oklahoma, and they do, special type of beef. Anyway, they have a program. It's going to be held from the second week of June in Columbia. They have a week-long program, but I could put, apparently this is an entrepreneurship program at Columbia, and I just feel like, Brian, Lisa, I should just send an email introducing the two of you to this professor, Nelson Freeman, and saying, hey, it seems like you guys might at least want to talk, because all the companies that they have pulled in, they're startups. They seem to be very young startups. The company I've been asked to help has 5 employees. So, these are people in the baby stage. I asked specifically if I could be assigned a startup that had something to do with moving physical stuff around, something with a supply chain. So they gave me somebody with a supply chain. Apparently it's a particular type of, environmentally friendly beef type of thing, whatever it is. But it just seems like, they're right here in New York. Maybe just need some email to introduce you, and I'll let the two of you figure out whether or not, you may want to come by, just listen in on a couple, on a lecture at Columbia. They might invite you in, and just, because I think what you're doing is at a minimum educational. Somehow they think that I'm going to be able to talk to these guys and offer some help. They've got a whole bunch of fairly high-level academics. When they're listing all the names, I'm like, wow, I know all those people. So I'm like, okay, sure.
Yeah.
Yes, and an intro would be amazing, and we can tell them that one of the startups in our portfolio actually comes out of Columbia. So.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, I'll follow up with an email of introduction and saying, hey, it seems like there's a lot of joint interest here. So I'll do that as soon as I get off the call.
Thank you.
Thank you, Warren. Brian, should I tease the idea that I've been kicking around for our destination event?
I think it's too early. Let's give it some time to gestate a little bit. Any other questions? comment?
I'm gonna throw out the high level concept.
Hi, Hugo.
So what does everyone think of a supply chain summer camp? What would that look like to you? We're envisioning a destination where we spend a couple of days together with our portfolio companies and a lot of other special speakers, and rolling up our sleeves and collaborating, because as you've seen, all of our portfolio companies, supply chain, everything connects to everything else. And there's so many shared insights and opportunities of expertise, customers, etc. We just want to spend 24/7 with our portfolio companies and invite a curated group of additional experts, investors, and partners to come and attend.
Sounds neat. By the way, Brian, I'm going to remind you that I raised the issue of decision analytics. You said something about getting back to that.
Yes.
Go ahead,
yeah,
Warren.
yes,
It's all you.
yes.
No. I just said you specifically put decision analytics in the title. I find there is astonishing confusion.
There is.
What is meant, but by the way, forget the word analytic, the word decision. You would
Yeah.
think everybody knows what a decision is.
You
Let
would.
me tell you something I found with my new way of thinking. So we academics get really involved in, well, how do you make a decision? Here's all these complicated methods. And my framework has really simplified it to the point where instead of focusing on how to make a decision, I focus on questions like, what is the decision? So I've decided I have a 6-step process, and the first step involves answering 3 questions. What metrics are you trying to optimize on? What decisions are you making, and maybe who makes them? And what are the sources of uncertainty? So if I want to build one of my fancy computer models, I absolutely need the answers to those 3 questions. So I started to realize, what if you're not going to build a fancy computer model, but you still want to build a better operation?
Mhm.
I claim, how can you possibly do that without answering those 3 questions?
true,
So
yeah.
in the business community, most of the time, I think people have a decent idea of metrics. Maybe they can refine some stuff, but usually people have an idea of, here's what I want to achieve. Then you ask them, like I've asked supply chain executives, says, does anybody have a little red book of what decisions they make? And everybody just stares at me. You would think, well, if you want to run a better supply chain, you have to make better decisions. Don't you think you should have a list of all the decisions you're making? And I just get blank stares. So forget all the fancy math. When you have decision analytics, if you want the computer to help you make a decision, you better know what decisions you're making.
You're making, yeah.
Well, guess what? That tends to be
So
hard.
most people do, yeah.
So yesterday I was invited to give a talk to Honeywell, and they had their whole data analytics. They have a monthly club type of thing.
Mhm.
And they seemed to all love the presentation. It's great. And then a follow-up email from the guy who invited me says, oh, but Warren, when it's stochastic optimization, everything gets so complicated. And this was right after I gave my whole talk about how, we've got these 4 classes of policies, and that includes whatever it is you're already doing. And suddenly he was still convinced. This is a guy with a good technical education. And I'm convinced that people with a good technical education are just broken. I'd much rather have somebody with a clean slate. I'd love people who don't even know what Bellman's equation is, because it's almost useless. And I'm like, just please. I think the universities are breaking people. The academics get in and they're like, oh my God, you got to learn my fancy math over here. Nobody in business uses that fancy math. Turns out what people are doing in business is not bad. It's pretty sensible. I mean, you can't run a real operation without making fundamentally good decisions.
Yeah.
But a lot of times we don't always know what the decisions are, because you know what? We already know what we're going to do. Lisa, I was trying to pull that out of you with your company.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I had a little hard time doing that.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I know you've got decisions in there, and I don't know, somehow I'm like, but I know you're making decisions.
Yeah. No, I think what you're touching upon also is something that I've been seeing over and over again as I talk different venues. What supply chain comes down to is that you can't get around the pesky humans. You know, they're always have a mind of their own, and
Well,
everything
one of-
comes down to relationships and
So
decisions.
one of the things that I do is, when I want to keep it simple, I'll say, what are the metrics? What are the decisions? But often I will add in parentheses and who makes the decisions.
Mhm.
So it's what decisions and who makes them. And the reason why most supply chain people don't know about decisions is because they're not making the decision. The guy over here is making the decisions. What the high level guy is in charge of is the metric. He says, I don't care how you make decision. I don't care what you do, but just meet this metric. And that's why the companies don't know about decisions, because they're not the one making the decision. They're like, well, you just go do your job, but you better hit these numbers. That's
I think you've just fixed what's broken about most companies, Warren.
well, one of the things you want to do is to separate.
It sounds like Arun wants to jump in on the conversation.
Oh, yeah, I interpreted data analytics versus decision analytics a little bit differently. My experience has been, there are a lot of companies that have data that kind of surface stuff up that's interesting.
Yeah.
But I find that you only become sticky with your customers if it actually fits into their workflow.
Yep.
And actually helps them make some decision within their tasks. So
Yes.
I was kind of wondering what percentage of folks serve up sort of data that's kind of interesting and nice to have versus actually plug into something that their customers become an indispensable tool.
Hey, I used to teach a whole lecture that had the theme of, what is information? And I would start with data and say, data is anything you store on the computer. And then I would distinguish two types of data. Data used to make a decision, and I call that information. So what do you call everything else? And I came up with a name for it. I called it entertainment.
Yeah.
Because it's just, I don't know, people look at it and they're like, oh, that's nice. And then they don't actually know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And so one of the neat things about, my framework is that you make decisions with something I call a policy, and the policy depends on something called a state variable, which is a terrible name for it. But a state variable is the information you need to make a decision. So the exercise of creating what the academics call a state variable in plain English says, let's figure out the information you really, really need. And then everything else is just entertainment. Now, I had somebody tell me he had a special category of information that's sort of off to the side. He called it accounting variables. And I realized another word might be a reporting variable. In fact, it's a form of entertainment, but it might be required by law. It might be required by a partner, something that you have to report, but you don't actually use to make a decision. In other words, it is important. I mean, you still have to pull it together. It's just you pull it together for somebody else and you're not using it internally. So when I write the next edition of my book, I'm going to have a special name for this information that I don't actually use or need, but other people do. Maybe the IRS needs it. I don't know accounting. I mean, one thing I may not have in common with any of you is I never took a course in accounting. I'm the faintest.
Compliance data.
Yeah. I'll just give you also like a personal anecdote, sort of from my business. I feel very strongly about this because, we do a lot of supply chain risk management, and I'm harvesting a lot of open data that's freely available and commercial API data. And our first iterations, we were just showing up analytics like you've got a lot of risk, high, medium, low. Right? But then our big customers are like, thanks for pointing out a lot of problems to me, but what are we going to do about this? And I thought about
what's the decision?
Yeah. But I thought one simple thing that we added into our software that actually made a huge difference is just being able to assign people to workflow to say, this problem needs to go route to this person. It made it a lot more of a tool rather than just like a informational thing. And so I think my big thing now is sort of like, if you're in a data analytics business, you gotta turn into a workflow tool if you actually want. If you actually want to stay sticky, especially on large enterprise sales. So that's how I'm starting to sort of divide up between data analytics and decisions, right? Like if it doesn't fit into a workflow that can ultimately, if it doesn't ultimately end up in a financial statement category, It's not really, I don't think it's really getting into decisional.
Mhm. Mhm.
All right, that's my 2 cents.
No, that's helpful. And in fact, as you were saying that, I wrote a note to myself saying, introduce Overwatch to Arun.
Yeah.
in addition to Clarion. So, well, we've come to the end of the hour that we budgeted for the call. And so if there are no other questions, I will bring this update to a close. As always, we're available by email. If you have any follow-up questions, don't hesitate to send us a note. If you're an LP in the fund and you run into issues with AngelList, don't hesitate to send us a note and we'll get on it with the team. And you know, we closed 2 investments this week, I think. We'll close 2 investments this week. It looks like we might have 1 more closing next week, although we have to do some thinking about it. The fundraising environment is interesting. I think the fundraising environment is enabling investors to behave in ways that could be detrimental, to shoot themselves in the foot. And so that's something that we have to think about. We saw a term sheet yesterday and we're like, wait, this doesn't make any sense. Anyway,
Yeah.
we're getting too deep into the weeds. Thank you for joining us. We will process the recording and send it out with the presentation not too long after this. And if we don't speak to you between now and then, hopefully we'll see you on the next quarterly update. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Brian and Lisa.